Story 1.
The air had begun to chill and the leaves rustled with the approach of autumn. As I stood behind the counter of my father's bakery, the question that had always nagged me resurfaced. Why do people celebrate Halloween on October 31st? I wasn't just any baker. I was Sean, a young man of 26 with an unusual physical presence. Towering above most, and blessed with a strength that often surprised those who knew me, I couldn't help but be curious about the origins of this curious holiday. My father's store, a quaint bakery nestled in the heart of a small, sleepy town, was known for its exquisite pastries and confections. But today, it was Halloween, and my thoughts were far from buttery croissants and flaky pies. My contemplation led me to unravel the twisted history of Halloween, a history steeped in darkness and mystery. The roots of this peculiar celebration traced back to pre-Christian times, an age when the land was cloaked in the lore of Celtic tribes. To them, October 31st marked the end of one year and the dawn of another. On this day, the Celts believed that the deity of death rose to power, summoning the souls of the departed. The ancient Celtic legend declared that Halloween was the night when the gates between the realms of the living and the dead swung wide open, allowing the souls of the departed to tread upon the earth. People of yore, terrified by the idea of encountering malevolent spirits, devised methods to fend off the otherworldly invaders. Their solution? Fire and revelry. The fiery flames were believed to act as a beacon, guiding lost souls to their rightful destination. In tandem, they adorned themselves in ghastly costumes to confound and bemuse the evil spirits, masking their true identities beneath gruesome visages. With such customs, the living hoped to drive away the specters that lurked in the shadows of Halloween. But as I stood in my father's bakery, I couldn't help but ponder the transformation of this ancient tradition. The Halloween I had known wasn't merely a night of bonfires and disguises. It had evolved into an opportunity for the truly sinister to shroud themselves among the ordinary folk, lurking in the shadows to enact their nefarious deeds. Over the years, I had witnessed the horrors of Halloween firsthand. It wasn't mere folklore or legend, but a night when the line between reality and the supernatural blurred. As I continued to reflect, I couldn't escape the memories that haunted me. My memory carried me back to the time when my world was as simple as the town we lived in. Back then, I was just a boy, living with my parents in a small town in the northern reaches of the country. The heart of our family lay in our humble bakery, just as it does today. My father was a hereditary baker, and our store was renowned in the tight-knit community that nestled amongst the hills. My childhood was marked by carefree days. I went to school, played with friends, and knew little of life's griefs or complexities. But a single man, an enigmatic figure, would cast a looming shadow over our tranquil town. He was a stranger, newly arrived, and the town's collective curiosity was piqued by his presence. In a small community where familiarity was the norm, the stranger's reticence and elusive nature sparked intrigue. He seldom ventured into the public eye, often retreating to the seclusion of his home. Speculations about his identity and purpose burgeoned, forming a labyrinth of rumors that snaked through our town like ivy on an old brick wall. Some believed he was a former gangster, seeking refuge in the quiet of our town, an attempt to escape the clutches of his criminal past. Others whispered that he was a clandestine operative, working for a shadowy agency, whose very existence was hushed in secrecy. Then there were those who claimed he was a murderer, an alleged serial killer, evading the long arm of the law. As a young boy, I soaked up these whispered legends and nefarious tales with dread. The sinister aura that enveloped this enigmatic stranger etched itself deep into my psyche, manifesting as genuine fear. His image in my young mind was that of a malevolent and forbidding figure. I would have been content to never cross paths with him, to never look into the eyes of the man who had ignited the town's darkest fantasies. My father, on the other hand, had a way of seeing things differently. He'd chuckle, dismissing the hearsay as mere nonsense. He held the conviction that one's character was not defined by the chilling stories woven by idle tongues. For my father, the stranger was just another patron who had stepped into our bakery, seeking bread, pastries, and the warmth of our small-town hospitality. On an ordinary evening, as I trudged home along the meandering streets of our quiet town, I could not have foreseen the unsettling encounter that would leave an indelible mark on my life. This day was just like any other, if it weren't for the constant chill of the coming fall. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch from the town's very soul. As I walked along, immersed in my thoughts, my gaze wandered into an alley. A narrow passage between the weathered buildings, it was a place I rarely paid attention to, nor did anyone else in our town. Yet it was there, behind a grimy dumpster, that my reality took a sudden and ominous turn. I halted in my tracks, my heart pounding, as I witnessed a man who defied any logical explanation. He stood concealed behind the dumpster, furtively observing someone or something down the alley. From my vantage point, he had not noticed me. I was hidden in the shadows. My curiosity warred with an innate sense of dread that churned within me. The man's bizarre behavior set my nerves on edge. In a moment of sheer misfortune, my trembling hands betrayed me. A can of fizzy drink slipped from my grasp, hitting the cold, unforgiving ground with a resounding clang. The stranger, alert to the slightest sound, twitched and turned with an uncanny swiftness. His gaze, those eyes I can never forget, fell upon me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. His tall, imposing frame was shrouded in a long, gray coat that billowed like a wraith in the night. His features, simultaneously Asian and European, marked him as a mestizo. A rugged countenance framed those eyes, eyes that held me captive. They were deep pools of darkness, unwavering in their intensity, and seemed to radiate an unsettling aura. His stare was akin to a sharpened blade, cutting through the fog of my confusion and terror. It felt as if he was peering into my very soul. My limbs turned to lead as he approached me. He was unflinching, reaching down to retrieve the fallen can. The silence between us was deafening, a void filled with unspoken questions and unshakable fear. He handed me the can with an effortless gesture, as if the bizarre encounter had never occurred. And then he walked away without uttering a single word. I watched him retreat, his form receding into the labyrinth of shadows, until he was swallowed by the darkness. I was left alone, my heart racing, my thoughts a tumultuous whirlwind. The encounter raised an array of questions in my mind. Why had the man been lurking in that desolate alley? Whom had he been observing with such intensity? And why was he, of all places, near our bakery? I couldn't escape the disquiet that gnawed at me. The stranger's presence and peculiar behavior, combined with those haunting eyes, had left an indelible mark on my psyche. That night, as I surrendered to the realm of dreams, I found myself ensnared in a nightmare. It was a chilling sequence where I fled from the man with the enigmatic eyes, yet his relentless gaze followed me, as though I were a mere puppet in his nightmarish theater. The bitter cold of that dream seeped into my bones, leaving me disoriented and lost. But in the end, it was my mother who emerged as the beacon of salvation in that surreal nightmare. She rescued me from the clutches of the man with the obsidian eyes. I awoke in a cold sweat, grateful for the warmth of my blanket, though the memory of the dream lingered like a specter in the dark corners of my mind. I ached to dismiss the unsettling dream, to attribute it to mere coincidence, but a pervasive unease lingered in my heart. My beloved holiday, Halloween, drew near, and I could not help but wonder if it held any connection to the enigmatic stranger and his chilling eyes. The anticipation for Halloween was palpable, as the quiet town I called home began its transformation. Shop windows came alive with ghoulish candies and eerie figurines of ghosts and zombies, each promising the sweet thrill of the season. My father's bakery, like the others, had taken on a spectral charm, adorned with my handmade pumpkin figures, which cast playful shadows on the walls. Halloween, a time I held dear, was a festival of endless possibilities. My friends and I had charted a course through the town, a map of spooks and frights, where we'd scare our neighbors, and, in return, collect the coveted treasure trove of candy. My mother had outdone herself this year, crafting for me a splendid werewolf costume. Its lifelike features filled me with joy, and I couldn't wait to unveil it on the big night. My excitement for the holiday was a beacon of light in the gathering shadows. Yet my elation was eclipsed by a looming darkness that stretched its fingers into the heart of our town. The discordant note that intruded upon our festive spirit was the disappearance of one of our own, Dr. Dustin. He was a long-standing pillar of our community, a venerable physician who had tended to the town's ailments for as long as anyone could remember. His reputation as a healer had transcended generations, and many had sought his care for years. It was a shock to the core when news of his vanishing swept through town. The search for Dr. Dustin led us to a macabre discovery, a gruesome tableau etched in the annals of our town's history. His severed head and a lone arm were found in a forlorn ditch. The air grew heavy with despair and foreboding as the townsfolk grappled with the unnerving reality. The authorities, in their search for answers, postulated the grim possibility that a wild animal might be responsible for the dismemberment of Dr. Dustin. The rationale seemed plausible at first, invoking eerie tales of nocturnal predators lurking in the woods. But as the investigation unfolded, the horror escalated, and the thin veneer of logic shattered like glass. 2 days later, the town recoiled in sheer horror as another grisly murder came to light. It was Officer Anderson, tasked with the investigation into Dr. Dustin's demise, who had met an equally gruesome fate. His lifeless form, torn and mangled, was discovered in yet another of the town's ditches. The aftermath was a stark testament to a savagery that transcended mere animal instinct. Panic gripped the town like a vice, and fear became the inescapable specter that haunted our streets. Residents clamored for justice, demanding the apprehension and punishment of the malevolent force that had cast its dark shadow over our peaceful abode. The prevailing belief, and a sentiment I couldn't help but share, was that these acts were not the result of a wild beast's savagery. No, it bore the mark of human malevolence, a sinister mind behind the carnage. To ensure the safety of the town's inhabitants, an urgent plea went out, a call to remain vigilant. Homes were fortified with locked doors, and no one dared to venture out alone. Halloween, the holiday that had always been a source of joy and exhilaration, now loomed on the horizon, bearing a chilling weight. As the town quivered beneath the ominous portents, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange man with the piercing black eyes, the enigmatic stranger I had encountered in that eerie alley, held any connection to the unfolding darkness. In the hushed corners of our town, a sinister undercurrent had taken hold, swirling with accusations and suspicions. I, too, was gripped by a conviction that the enigmatic man with the haunting black eyes, who had recently transplanted himself into our tranquil community, bore the mark of the murderer. It seemed I was not alone in my thoughts. The once friendly denizens of our township shared whispers and doubts that echoed my own fears. The man's behavior had taken a malevolent turn. Reports of his clandestine activities, lurking and skulking through the labyrinthine alleys, had become more frequent. There was an undeniable shift in his demeanor, and the rumors that swirled around his past only served to deepen the suspicions. This veil of mistrust cast a long... The search for Dr. Dustin led us to a macabre discovery, a gruesome tableau etched in the annals of our town's history. His severed head and a lone arm were found in a forlorn ditch. The air grew heavy with despair and foreboding as the townsfolk grappled with the unnerving reality. The authorities, in their search for answers, postulated the grim possibility that a wild animal might be responsible for the dismemberment of Dr. Dustin. The rationale seemed plausible at first, invoking eerie tales of nocturnal predators lurking in the woods. But as the investigation unfolded, the horror escalated, and the thin veneer of logic shattered like glass. 2 days later, the town recoiled in sheer horror as another grisly murder came to light. It was Officer Anderson, tasked with the investigation into Dr. Dustin's demise, who had met an equally gruesome fate. His lifeless form, torn and mangled, was discovered in yet another of the town's ditches. The aftermath was a stark testament to a savagery that transcended mere animal instinct. Panic gripped the town like a vice, and fear became the inescapable specter that haunted our streets. Residents clamored for justice, demanding the apprehension and punishment of the malevolent force that had cast its dark shadow over our peaceful abode. The prevailing belief, and a sentiment I couldn't help but share, was that these acts were not the result of a wild beast's savagery. No, it bore the mark of human malevolence, a sinister mind behind the carnage. To ensure the safety of the town's inhabitants, an urgent plea went out, a call to remain vigilant. Homes were fortified with locked doors, and no one dared to venture out alone. Halloween, the holiday that had always been a source of joy and exhilaration, now loomed on the horizon, bearing a chilling weight. As the town quivered beneath the ominous portents, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange man with the piercing black eyes, the enigmatic stranger I had encountered in that eerie alley, held any connection to the victim's body lay torn asunder, arms and legs severed, entrails and vital organs missing, leaving a gruesome scene that defied explanation. Yet in stark contrast, the face remained almost untouched, marred only by the absence of one eye, while the other eye retained a haunting gaze of frozen terror. It was Black Eyes. The third victim was the same strange man everyone suspected of the murders. It was a grim revelation that shattered the town's collective certainty. The one who had been cast as the killer had now fallen victim to the same brutality that had terrorized us. The town, once united in suspicion, now faced the harrowing truth. The true murderer still roamed among us, their identity an impenetrable mystery. The uncertainty that had veiled our town in dread, the chilling ambiguity of not knowing which of our neighbors was the remorseless maniac, became more terrifying than the grisly murders themselves. Panic seized our streets as residents grappled with the magnitude of the unknown threat. In their desperation, they began arming themselves and fortifying their homes, a stark departure from the trusting community we once were. Tensions escalated, and the once peaceful town was marred by fights and skirmishes. The police and local authorities found themselves grappling with a situation that was spiraling out of control. Drastic measures were now being considered as the foundations of our town's way of life trembled under the weight of unrelenting fear. In our own home, the pall of fear had settled. My father, ever protective, took precautionary measures, closing our store earlier and discreetly placing an old gun under the counter. My mother, usually an embodiment of warmth and care, now spent more time within the safe confines of our home, working remotely as her sense of unease grew. As for me, I was forbidden to venture outside with my friends, and I sought solace in the digital realm of console games. There, I could temporarily escape the horrors of reality, even if only for a brief respite. Each passing day weighed heavily upon us as the tendrils of fear dug deeper into our lives. The undeniable truth loomed large. Somewhere among the ordinary residents of our town, an unseen maniac continued to lurk, their identity an enigma that seemed impossible to unravel. It happened the night before the Halloween Day celebration. A potent cocktail of restlessness and rebellion bubbled within me. The confines of our home had become stifling, and my longing for the freedom of the streets had grown insatiable. On that fateful day, my school friend Clive and I hatched a daring plan through whispered phone calls. Escape our homes and rendezvous at one of the abandoned houses that stood sentinel in our town. The idea was simple. Gather a group of kids, gather rocks, and, in an act of misguided bravery, shatter the windows of the house belonging to the enigmatic man who had cast a shadow of fear over our lives. I was plagued by memories of the strange man with the haunting black eyes, an encounter etched in the depths of my mind like an indelible scar. Revenge against the fear that had gripped me seemed enticing, and so I set out to confront my own terrors. As I left my home, making my way to the appointed meeting place, I was met with an unexpected sight. A lone Clive stood there. He relayed the disappointing news that our other friends had failed to escape the watchful eyes of their parents. Although my initial excitement was tempered by the absence of a group, I resolved to proceed with our audacious plan. The day drew nearer to evening, casting long shadows that heralded the arrival of Halloween. Armed with a pocket full of rocks, we marched toward the foreboding house. As we approached its grim facade, Clive, ever the instigator, began to plant the seed of a reckless idea in my mind. He suggested that we venture inside and explore the house, his words dripping with mockery. He goaded me, labeling me a coward, and in my desperation to prove my courage, I agreed to accompany him. Clive assured me that we were safe, for the owner of the house, the strange man himself, was dead. His words provided little solace, but I trudged forward, the gnawing fear in my chest urging me to push onward. The house loomed ahead, and we climbed through a shattered window, our entry into the darkness marked by the haunting creak of splintered wood. Inside, a suffocating stillness enveloped us, broken only by the echoes of our own hushed breaths. The house felt like a tomb, its silence broken only by our tentative footsteps. Dust hung thick in the air, and I couldn't help but notice the impressions of heavy police boots etched into the floor. My father's conversations had once hinted at a police search, their futile attempts to unearth secrets hidden within these very walls. I felt a growing unease that I couldn't explain, an irrational fear that clung to me like a shadow. In my apprehension, I edged closer to Clive, my silent plea for reassurance met only with his sly amusement. He mocked my unease, enjoying the power his taunts held over me. We continued to navigate the dark, labyrinthine halls, the oppressive silence feeding our anxiety. It was then that Clive stumbled upon an unexpected discovery, a hiding place concealed behind a weathered wooden frame. Within the hidden nook lay a small box. It was filled with photographs. As Clive and I delved into the box of photographs hidden within the eerie house, we were confronted with a collection of memories and faces from the past. Some pictures were aged and grayscale, while others were captured in vivid color. The people in these images appeared entirely ordinary, yet an unsettling sensation nagged at the edge of my consciousness. It was as though they bore secrets lurking just beneath the surface, secrets that eluded my understanding. Among the array of images, one picture held a curious allure. An image of a dense forest with a young girl in a dress standing beside a massive gray canine. The girl's beauty was undeniable, her presence hauntingly familiar, yet frustratingly beyond my ability to recall. I struggled to place her in my memory, but the puzzle remained incomplete. Clive, however, seemed to recognize the girl immediately, his surprise evident in the glint of his eyes. He gazed at me, a sly smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He quipped, "Have you been so paralyzed by fear that you've forgotten the glaringly obvious Shaun? Don't you recognize her?" Before I could respond to Clive's taunts, the chilling symphony of an unfamiliar sound reached our ears. We turned in unison, our eyes locking onto the window, through which a shadowy figure had suddenly materialized. Dread swelled in my chest, and the picture slipped from my trembling fingers as I bolted toward the window, desperate to escape the encroaching terror. Clive raced after me, our collective panic propelling us toward the exit. Yet, as we approached the window through which we had earlier infiltrated the house, it became painfully evident that we were not alone in our quest to exit. The sound of shattering glass followed us, like an ominous herald of our impending doom. Without hesitation, I hurled myself out of the window, landing in a painful heap on the ground below. Ignoring the jolt of pain, I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, and my instincts screaming for me to flee. Clive followed suit, his breaths labored as we bolted away from the accursed house. As our footsteps carried us to the safety of the park, its thick canopy of trees offered a shield against the darkness that now enveloped the town. Our hearts pounded, and fear clung to us like a shroud. As we wandered around the stranger's house, we didn't notice that night had fallen, and now we were being pursued by an unknown person. The malevolent figure that had stalked our town, leaving death in its wake, was now, it seemed, chasing us. We collapsed against a tree, our breaths ragged, our eyes wide with terror. The unknown hunted us, and we were left with no answers, only the certainty that danger lurked in the shadows. Clive was injured when he jumped out of the window. He accidentally scraped his leg on the broken glass. I didn't pay any attention to it, because I was so scared. But when we stopped for a break, I noticed that his mangled limb was covered in blood. The sight of the bloody leg made me sick. I couldn't help myself and vomited violently. My stomach revolted at the disgusting stench of blood and broken glass. I started coughing uncontrollably. Then an icy chill gripped my body, and searing pain radiated through my chest and into my head. My vision blurred as tears welled up and I collapsed to my knees, writhing in torment. Through the haze of pain, I glimpsed a tall, shadowy figure approaching. Her eyes, like those of a wild beast, glowed with a predatory intensity. Just before unconsciousness swallowed me, her presence loomed large, and I felt as though I was prey awaiting a predator's strike. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself lying with my head resting on my mother's lap. Her loving and tender gaze met mine. Confusion overcame me, and I stammered, "Mom." She stroked my head gently and remained silent. As I attempted to rise, dizziness washed over me. and I realized that I was completely naked, as was my mother. Unease gnawed at me, and I questioned how we had ended up exposed to the night's cold embrace. My mother's silence lingered, and with a heavy sigh she handed me a photograph. It was the same image Clive and I had found in the eerie house, a young girl standing beside a massive gray wolf. Recognition struck me like a thunderbolt, and I struggled to understand the connection. "Where is Clive?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mother continued to fix her unwavering gaze upon me, her lips curving into an enigmatic smile. It was then that I noticed her sharp, elongated fangs glistening in the moonlight. A sense of unease settled over me as she began to speak, revealing a long-hidden family secret. "You recognize the girl in the picture, Sean?" she said softly. "Do not doubt it. That girl is me, your mother, captured when I was just 14 or 15 years old, many years ago. And standing beside me is not just a wolf, but your grandfather, Sean. This is his true form." Her unsettling smile and the revelation of her true nature left me deeply uneasy. Summoning my inner strength, I mustered the courage to ask my mother once more about Clive's fate. Her joyous smile waned, replaced by a solemn expression. She raised her hand and pointed to a horrifying sight nearby. Following the direction of her hand, my eyes locked onto the remains of Clive. It was a grisly sight, a grotesque testament to a gruesome fate. What remained of my dear friend lay there, mutilated and lifeless. The sight struck a deep chord of revulsion and fear within me, and I couldn't contain the sudden surge of nausea that overcame me. I instinctively covered my mouth, but it was too late. The acrid taste of bile and the stench of death permeated the air. I had begun to piece together the terrible events that had transpired. A nightmarish recollection clawed its way to the forefront of my mind, and the vile memories flooded over me. The revelation that I had been involved in such horror sent shivers down my spine, causing me to vomit once again. My mother, her hand gently caressing my head, addressed the awful truth, her words laden with remorse and responsibility. "You're beginning to remember, Sean. I couldn't reach you in time, and it was your hunger that took Clive's life. I failed to stop you, and I carry that burden of responsibility. But our power and our insatiable hunger can be tamed, even in one so young as you. I'll teach you, guide you through this." Her smile returned, imbued with the warmth of a mother's love, reassuring me that despite the horrifying ordeal, everything would be okay. But as the haunting memories of the town's gruesome murders and the eerie man with the ominous black eyes resurfaced, I couldn't help but confront my curiosity. I turned to my mother, seeking answers about the mysterious man. Her expression shifted to one of sadness as she began to reveal the unsettling truth. "This man was a hunter," she explained. "One of those who sought individuals like us, my mother, my grandfather, and now myself. They existed within the world as predators, relentlessly tracking their quarry. It was the reason our world was far from safe," she cautioned. My mother's voice quivered as she continued, explaining that I must safeguard our secret. If our truth were ever to be discovered by a doctor or a lawman, it would surely pique the interest of the malevolent hunter with those piercing black eyes. A solemn reality hung in the air as she confided, "We may need to leave this town, the place we've come to cherish." In that moment, my mother unraveled more enigmatic threads of our family's history. She disclosed that she hailed from a secluded village in France, her origins veiled in secrecy and obscurity. My father, she assured me, was a regular man who, despite being privy to my mother's unique nature, protected and loved her without judgment. A flicker of hope ignited within me as I grappled with the complexities of my family's reality. As my mother shared these revelations, a sinister truth took root within my psyche. On October 31st, each year, our strength burgeoned, but our insatiable hunger became an uncontrollable force. It was a day when the boundary between the living and the deceased blurred, a day when death itself seemed to cast its dark veil over the world. The newfound understanding of my lineage and our extraordinary nature left me with a profound sense of unease, a darkness that seemed to linger despite the warmth of my mother's love.
Story 2.
The full moon replaced the sun, and children in their spooky costumes took to the streets. Only once a year did the small town of St. Martinville, Louisiana, see so many little vampires and werewolves, zombies and mummies, leisurely wandering with their pumpkin baskets along the alleys and parks. The children, playing dead with smiles from ear to ear, anticipated their candy hunt, while their parents held their own little celebration. Gathering in front of TV screens in large groups with bowls of salty popcorn, they planned to watch their favorite horror movies. Some organized Halloween movie marathons featuring all parts of A Nightmare on Elm Street, while others preferred the Saw franchise. Indulging in heaps of junk food and washing it down with beer, the adults forgot about their children, who for one night each year were free from all prohibitions and could do whatever they wanted. The little nightmares roamed the town, knocking on every house they came across. When the door opened, the mini-monsters would scream out a phrase before thrusting their pumpkin buckets forward, which were quickly filled with candies, gummies, cookies, in short, everything that rots teeth but pleasantly fills bellies. No one could resist the children's charms and the ancient tradition of opening the door to any creature that knocks on Halloween. No one, or almost no one. Everyone knew that on this day it was best to stay away from old Fred's house. His creepy house, known to locals as the ghost house, used to always attract children because it was taller than all the others and stood on the outskirts of town. The Gothic style in which Fred had once built his house played a key role in its unpleasant name, which its owner had once enjoyed. Its triangular roof, square chimney, and arched windows made the old man's house look like a castle. The black wood and brown shingles added the necessary spookiness for Halloween. Many years ago, every October 31st, the ghost house would be filled with people, as the then young Fred hosted his hellish ball. Every respectable resident of St. Martinville simply had to be there. These balls were always a hit, and the elders who were lucky enough to dance at Fred's place when he wasn't yet mad, killed by his grief, often reminisce about them. But it has been over 20 years since the ghost house's doors opened to a guest who knocked. Old Fred became a recluse who didn't want to engage in social conversations, let alone entertain guests. His creepy house was now covered in mold and cobwebs as it decayed along with its owner. All the children of St. Martinville knew better than to approach the ghost house, especially on Halloween. But despite this, someone knocked on its door that night. Old Fred was sitting in his chair, slowly consuming rum. A black cat lay curled up on his lap, purring softly, soothing the old man's broken heart. Despite the late hour, Fred didn't want to sleep. Every October 31st, a terrible insomnia would overcome him, bringing back those horrific memories of that nightmare night he couldn't forget. The rum bottle was almost empty, and the black cat Thomas had already fallen asleep when someone knocked on the ghost house's door. The old man hadn't heard that sound in a long time. He was rarely disturbed, especially not on Halloween for the past 20 years. But today, someone dared to knock on his wooden door. Fred decided not to answer, hoping the unwelcome guest or guests would leave. But the knocking continued, now louder. "Go away, whoever you are," shouted the old man at the top of his lungs. His scream didn't stop the knocking. Fists continued to pound on the door. Then Fred finished the remaining rum and threw the empty bottle at the door, frightening his cat, who jumped up and left his lap. But even the bottle shattering into dozens of shards didn't stop the knocking. For old Fred, this sound was unbearable, especially on this night. He got up from his beloved chair and, taking his cane in hand, headed to the door. The ghost house's owner was filled with rage. He wanted to wring the neck of the rascal who disturbed him on this nightmare night. But when he opened the door, he saw that the rascal was not alone. There were many of them, and they were all small. "Trick or treat," the four children said in unison. Death in a long black robe and holding a scythe, a witch with a triangular hat on her head, a green Frankenstein, and Dracula in his signature black cape with a red lining. The main vampire stood in front of everyone, and his pumpkin bucket was the first in line to receive the precious candies. "How I hate you all," the old man said with venom in his voice. Then raised his cane and struck little Dracula in the face with all his might. The boy in the costume fell to the ground, blood appearing on his cheek. As the children surrounded their injured friend, old Fred slammed the ghost house's door shut. Now the old man was sure those cursed children would leave him alone. "Are you okay, Arthur?" the little witch named Mary asked with a horrified voice. "Yes, it's just a scratch," Dracula said, getting up from the ground and wiping his cheek with his cape's sleeve. "My parents told me that a mad old man lives here, but I didn't think he was that mad. All right, let's go to other houses. We missed a few on the way here. I'm sure there's a lot of candy waiting for us there," the witch said with a smile. "So you're just going to let this go?" Arthur asked his friend angrily. "Then explain the meaning of the phrase we say, trick or treat." "The meaning is," Death, whose real name was Mike, joined the conversation. "If they don't give us a treat, we play a trick." "Yeah," the green Frankenstein named Jack agreed excitedly. "Let's play a trick on this stinky old man." "No," Mary protested. "Let's go to other houses. We were warned not to approach the ghost house, that its owner is a crazy old man." "That old man hit me," Arthur said, taking the witch's hand. "He drew first blood. Now it's our turn. Jack, search the house. Maybe you'll find an open window. We need to get inside." Taking a new bottle of rum from the kitchen, the old man returned to his favorite chair. A photo of his deceased son lay on the table beside him. In the photo, his boy was dressed as a zombie, all in tattered clothes stained with blood. The photo was taken 20 years ago, on that cursed Halloween when Fred's son died. The memories of that fateful night overwhelmed the old man, causing tears to flow from his eyes. It was the eve of All Saints' Day, and as was tradition, a ball was being held at the ghost house. Only adults attended, drinking expensive wine and participating in fun contests. Meanwhile, their children roamed from house to house, begging for candy from those unfortunate enough not to be Fred's guests. Among these children was the son of the ghost house's owner, the most creepy yet beautiful mansion in St. Martinville. Little Tom was enjoying Halloween with his friends, strolling along the alleys and parks, visiting every house in search of treats. There were so many children, and they were all so happy that no one immediately noticed the disappearance of the little zombie, who got distracted by examining his candy and fell behind his group. But this didn't scare him much. Tom's basket was almost full, and he couldn't wait to get home and show his loving father his haul. To shorten the way, the boy went through the park where the older kids loved to hang out. Little Zombie was walking, still engrossed in counting his treats, wanting to count all the chocolate bars, so he wasn't paying much attention to his surroundings. When the bright light of the headlamp blinded his eyes and the sound of the engine made him look up, it was already too late. The motorcycle was speeding so fast that it was impossible to see the boy, especially when its driver was dead drunk. Henry didn't even think to stop when his bike hit the child's body. The drunken motorcyclist thought he had run over some animal, so he kept going. Fred's son didn't die immediately. His body was thrown to the side and hit some tree, but the boy was strong and managed to get up. His whole body was covered in severe cuts. Blood was running down his forehead, but the child, staggering, made his way to his father's house. Everything was blurry before his eyes. He saw smiling people approaching him. Someone, laughing, said, "Great costume, kid. The blood looks so real." The little zombie managed to reach his house, from which loud music was blaring. Bleeding, he started knocking on the door, but his knock was so weak that no one heard it, and he couldn't reach the doorbell. "Dad, Dad, Dad," the boy muttered as he died. His body was found only in the morning, lying in a pool of his own blood on the doorstep of his home. The old man cried, and the black cat circled his feet, seemingly trying to comfort his master. "You are the only one who understands me," Fred said, stroking the cat. He was about to pour another glass of rum when he heard a noise in the kitchen. "What are we going to do?" asked the little witch as they found themselves inside the house. "I don't know yet. We need to look around and understand what we're dealing with," Arthur whispered. "Come here," Frankenstein said. "I found the kitchen." Once in the kitchen, Mike, dressed as Death, immediately rushed to the fridge. "This old man has nothing good here, only canned food," he said bitterly. "But there are knives," Jack whispered excitedly as he opened one of the kitchen drawers and started laying them out on the table. "And what do we need knives for?" Mary asked fearfully, feeling increasingly uneasy about the whole situation. "Knives are weapons, and you need weapons for war," Arthur explained, walking over to the table and picking up the largest knife. "My parents told me this old man killed someone. I think we shouldn't mess with him." Mary tried to reason with her friends. "And who said we were joking?" Frankenstein, now wrapping smaller knives around his fingers with tape, said with a creepy smile, "You're not Frankenstein anymore, Jack. You're Freddy Krueger," Mike said as his friend finished his little makeshift weapon and wiggled his knife fingers. "Check the fridge again, Mike. See if there's any ketchup. I want to leave a message for this stinky old man." Rising from his chair and taking his cane in one hand and a loaded pistol in the other, old Fred headed to the kitchen, where someone was trespassing without permission. The black cat that had been circling his feet just moments ago had disappeared, leaving the old man alone. The journey to the source of the noise took a few minutes, even though the kitchen was close. Grunting and cursing the unwelcome guests, Fred finally reached his destination, where he saw an enormous red message. "Blood for blood." Fred immediately understood who was behind this. Rage surged through him anew. Opening the drawer where he kept his knives, he found it empty. Now he wanted to destroy everything in his path. "Where are you, you damned kids?" the old man yelled, but no one answered. Silence, which Fred once loved, returned to the house. But the ghost house's owner knew that the intruders were still there and that they wouldn't leave easily. Realizing it was war, Fred took a metal box from the top shelf where he kept a gun. After checking the magazine, which held 12 bullets, he reloaded the weapon. Memories of those terrible days when his beloved boy died because of a damn motorcyclist flashed through his mind once again. The police quickly found the culprit behind Tom's death, That day, Henry was the only one racing through the park on a motorcycle. The young man didn't deny his guilt. He confessed everything, saying he was drunk and not watching where he was going. Fred demanded the highest punishment from the court, wanting the young man sentenced to death by electric chair. But the judge decided 10 years in a maximum security prison was sufficient for Henry. On that day, the doors of the ghost house closed to all residents of St. Martinville. Fred felt betrayed by the entire town, which hadn't prevented the judge from passing such an unfair sentence. The grieving father became a recluse, barely communicating with the people around him. In his ghost house, he counted the days, waiting for Henry's sentence to end and for him to return to his hometown. And 10 years passed. Buying a gun and waiting for Halloween, Fred went hunting. Outside, everyone was celebrating. Children were busy trick-or-treating, and adults were simply drunk, so no one really noticed the ghost house's owner. And he managed to reach Henry's door unnoticed. Preparing the gun, Fred knocked on the ex-motorcyclist's door, which opened on its own. Slightly surprised that the door was unlocked, he entered the house. Pointing the gun forward, Fred searched for his son's killer, but he was nowhere to be found. Finally, looking into the bedroom, he saw who he was looking for. Henry lay on the bed drenched in his own blood, or rather, his body lay there. His head was on the table. Someone had gouged out his eyes and tongue and inserted a candle into the skull. The burning black pits instead of eyes stared at Tom's father, who had come to avenge his son. For a few seconds, Fred was in shock, unable to move. He looked from the burning head to the blood-soaked bed, next to which was a nightstand. It was there that the ghost house's owner found Henry's tongue and eyes, neatly placed in jars of vinegar, staring back at him. When the shock passed, Fred quickly left the crime scene. He had no idea who had done this to the recently released man. But he was grateful to the killer for stealing his revenge. After all, death by bullet was far more merciful than the horror that befell Henry. And even though the grieving father hadn't killed anyone, the whole town was convinced that Fred was responsible for Henry's death. The 4 children hid in the old man's basement, where they replenished their energy with the collected candies and were ready for new tricks. Arthur was the first to emerge, followed by the others, with the reluctant little witch bringing up the rear. What next? Mike, holding an axe he had found in the basement, asked. "This?" little Dracula said, pointing to the black cat standing before them. The green Frankenstein, with knives for fingers, lunged at the cat, which, failing to run away, was caught by the little monster. "Please, boys, let the poor animal go," Mary pleaded. Arthur, who was already petting the cat, approached the only girl in their group. "No way," he said sternly. "You forgot what that stinky old man did." Dracula pointed to his cheek, where a red scratch was visible. "I think he loves this cat very much." "I saw a rope in the basement," Mike suddenly said. "Good idea." Arthur smiled. "Go get it. We need to deal with the cat." "No, please," Mary protested, but the boy dressed as Death had already gone to fetch the rope. Now the noises came from the bedroom on the second floor, a place old Fred rarely visited anymore because of his aching legs, preferring to sleep in his chair on the first floor. "Damn kids," he groaned, clutching his cane in one hand and the loaded pistol in the other. Slowly climbing the hated stairs, each step a painful ordeal for his back, the old man finally reached the bedroom door after more than 5 minutes, even though it was just a short distance away. Wheezing and cursing, he saw another message written in marker on the bedroom door. "Blood for blood. I'll kill you all." Old Fred hissed angrily as he opened the bedroom door. What he saw made him collapse to his knees. The pain in his back disappeared. Now his broken heart ached again. "No!" Fred cried through his tears. For there before him, hanging by a rope around its neck, was the cat. Its lifeless body swayed slightly, and its dead eyes occasionally glanced at the grief-stricken old man. "No, Thomas," the ghost house's owner groaned, touching the soft fur of his now dead beloved pet. "Hey, old man," a voice called from the first floor. "If you want to settle things with me, come downstairs," said Arthur, standing by the stairs, waiting for Fred. "Vile kids," Fred muttered, rising from his knees, filled with rage. Without his cane, he managed to approach the stairs, where at the bottom he saw the little Dracula waving at him and smiling. "This is for my cheek, you bastard," the boy said firmly. Fred tensed. He didn't see the two children in the costumes of Death and Frankenstein hiding under the bed until Arthur gave them the signal with his menacing speech. Mike and Jack stood behind the old man, pushing him in the back as he extended his arm and pointed the gun at their friend. The children's hands pushed the ghost house's owner, causing him to tumble down the stairs, and the gun fired. Old Fred awoke in his favorite chair on the first floor. His legs, arms, and back ached terribly. He had broken several bones but miraculously survived. Two children circled him. One of them, dressed as Death, held his gun. "I told you, Mike, he was alive. My dad's a doctor and I know how to find a pulse," Frankenstein said with venom in his voice. "What do you want?" The old man croaked, unable to stand. "You killed our friend, you old creep!" Jack yelled into the old man's ear. "And we want to torment you!" "Please stop," Mary sobbed, sitting in the corner next to their dead friend and stroking his hair. "Let's call an ambulance. Maybe Arthur can still be saved." "Look at him, stupid girl. Look at Arthur again," Jack said sternly. The little witch obeyed. She looked again at Dracula's mangled face, at his left eye, and at the place where the right side of his face should have been, but instead was a gaping black hole, revealing his cracked skull and the blood-soaked floor on which he sat. "We're not doctors. We're not adults. We can't know for sure," the witch whimpered. "You shouldn't have killed Thomas," the old man spoke again. "He wasn't just a cat." "Yeah, and who was he then?" Mike asked with a vicious smile. The old man coughed, and blood specks flew from his mouth. He was starting to die. "When my son's killer was punished, this black cat came to me. 10 years have passed since then, and he hasn't aged a bit. I gave him many nicknames, but this fluffy rascal wouldn't respond to any of them until I called him Thomas. My son's name was Tom, and I know he was the one who punished that bastard who loved to drive drunk on Halloween. My boy returned on Halloween and punished him, then settled in the cat's body and came to his father. So you didn't just kill a cat, you little monsters." "You're completely crazy, old man," Frankenstein sneered as he approached Fred. "You killed our friend, and you'll pay for it." "You'll regret not dying when you tumble down the stairs," Jack said, inserting one of his knife fingers into Fred's eye. The house echoed with the old man's horrific scream and the mad laughter of the two boys, who had lost their sanity at the sight of blood. When Fred stopped screaming, Jack pulled his knife out. "I think he's dead now," Mike said with a smile. "But just to be sure," he added, firing a bullet into the old man's chest. At that moment, the lights in the house went out. "What's happening?" Jack asked in terror. "Mommy, I'm scared," Mary cried out from the corner. When the lights flickered back on, a boy in a zombie costume stood before Frankenstein and the boy dressed as Death. The little zombie's hand reached for Mike's throat, and without thinking, Mike fired. The bullet passed through the zombie's head, but he didn't fall. He only smiled wider. Through the hole in the zombie's head, Mike saw the bullet hit Jack in the neck, causing him to collapse to the floor. "My name is Tom, and I want to play," the dead boy said, advancing on Mike while little Frankenstein died behind him. "Trick or treat?" "I have lots of candy. Take it all," Mike whimpered, dropping the gun from his hands. "My treat is you," Tom hissed before sinking his teeth into Mike's face. Mary continued to sob, unable to run anywhere. It seemed impossible to her. The old man's son, whom her friends had killed, would find her anyway. When Tom had completely devoured Mike's face, he approached the frightened little girl. "Please go away. Let me stay with my father alone," the dead boy said. Mary nodded at the corpse, standing before her. She quickly stood up and headed for the door to leave the ghost house forever. But before she closed the door, the little witch saw the dead boy approach his father, and the old man opened his eyes. She saw nothing more. Mary ran as fast as she could, away from this place, away from Halloween. Mary told this story many times, but no one believed her. Everyone understood that something terrible had happened to the girl. So terrible that her mind invented such a ridiculous story. The police found no dead boys, or the old man in the ghost house. Jack, Mike, and Arthur were searched for throughout the town, but were never found. Mary grew up in a mental hospital, and every October 31st, she had fits, claiming that her dead friends came to her at night and urged her to kill herself so they could all go trick-or-treating together again. As for St. Martinville itself, it was shrouded in a new legend. It is said that children who misbehave on Halloween are visited by a dead boy with his old one-eyed father. Whether it's true or not, no one knows, but one thing is certain. Children can sometimes be very cruel.